definitely where I was able to get the best results, was in creating really spiky, interesting, divisive advertising. That developed into a real weakness of mine, which is not seeking feedback and not seeking collaboration, and much more wanting to, hold on to my thing really tightly. One of the great sort of tips that we got from last year was this idea of just always trying to get people to make your work 10% better.
This is the B-Side. In this series, we're shining a light on the lesser-known stories behind some of Australia's most influential marketing, advertising and creative thinkers. We're going to discuss the often overlooked moments, the challenges, and most importantly, the inspirations that have fueled their successes. Because the real growth happens on the B-Side. Hello and welcome back to the B-Side, where we are exploring the incredible humans behind extraordinary achievements. Backed by popular demand, our most favoured episode from last year's Cairns Storyteller series, I have the delight of introducing Robbie Brammall once again. Robbie is not an awarded marketer because he's not allowed to enter an awards. He's renowned for doing all of the wrong things for the wrong reasons because he is the Director of Marketing and Communications for Mona. Robbie, I'm delighted to have you back.
Thanks for having me. What are we going to talk about?
I know. Well, we're going to talk about your B-Side. So look, I'm going to give you, I'm going to open the fence and I'm going to give you a paddock to roam in. Where do we start, right? Give us the journey, cradle to grave, in terms of how you've landed at Mona and what you've picked up along the way.
Yeah, great. No, thanks for having me on. And by popular demand, that was me emailing you. Yeah. I'm a Tasmanian guy. I grew up in Tassie and very fortunate to sort of grow up in a place where there is that real work-life balance. And I know you were recently holidaying
I was
down there. I was teeing you up with stuff. But when you grow up in Tassie, like you spend your whole time, you're bushwalking, you're mountain climbing, you're surfing, you're whitewater rafting, and very privileged to sort of grow up in that environment. But it does imprint on you, and it does end up flavouring sort of what motivates you moving forward. So I grew up in Tassie, went to uni in Tassie, and I was obsessed growing up with advertising for some reason. I think it was probably I Dream of Jeannie. And the dude on I Dream of Jeannie, I think his job was advertising executive. And so I got into my brain that I wanted to be an ad executive, and didn't know what that was. But that was, right from a young age, that's what I wanted to do. So I went to uni. In Tassie, you couldn't study marketing or advertising. I actually had to study economics so I could do marketing English in the same degree. And that's not my strength, Dan. I'm not a quantitative methods man. I'm not a Slutsky equation man.
I'm shocked.
So I was struggling through economics, but loving the marketing and English side of things. So I did that and had a great time in Tassie doing that. And then my first job straight out of uni was as a radio copywriter.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the first skeleton in the closet, was being a radio copywriter. And in hindsight, a really interesting grounding in marketing and advertising because, I was basically writing a radio ad for HOFM, Mix 101.7, biggest radio station in Tasmania. And I was having to write a radio ad every half hour. So I wrote maybe 4,000 radio ads in 2 years.
Wow, it's like the marketing equivalent of fast-moving consumer goods.
Yeah, everything. So every category, a grounding in every category. But I was writing the ads, then faxing them through to the clients, ringing them up, getting them approved, reading the ads. Then they'd come back, sign, and I'd go down to the studio and we'd record them and I'd help produce them. And so in hindsight, that was a fantastic grounding for, all the things to come, which was client relationships, managing up, selling things through, getting briefs. And, in my mind, there was some poor ads in there, Dan, in those 4,000 ads. But, you remember some of the classics. Matt's Meats was a classic. Tas windscreen repairs. I made a lot of puns about cracks. And I did, in my mind, pretty well out of that. And after 2 years, the rhythm of things in Tassie is you have to move away to establish a career. There wasn't, certainly pre-Mona, there weren't the opportunities down there that there are now. And so, we did the usual 2 years in London thing and took my CD of radio ads like an absolute fucking idiot. Did not know what I needed to do, and took my CD of award-winning Tasmanian radio ads and went over to London and then started to try and get a position in agencies over there in London. And that was where I learned everything. That was where I had the good fortune to meet up with my future ad partner, Ant Hatton, who's the art director. I'm the copywriter. And we just spent 2 years getting placements at all the very best agencies in London. So, Mother, Fallon, St. Luke's, AMV, Saatchi's, and, we just developing and learning from these absolute legends like, Trevor Beatty at TBWA. Actually, Ed Morris gave us the best bit of advice for young advertising creatives that we ever got. So I'll sprinkle in the first breadcrumb, Dan, which was, we were pretty poverty-stricken at the time.
Okay.
Living on Vimto and chip buddies. And that flavoured our advertising. And he's looked at our portfolio of junior work and he's gone, it's a bit black, lads. It's a bit black. But I know where you're at. And he goes, you're spending all your time on execution. And that's the opposite. You need to spend all your time on strategy. And so he drew this triangle for us. And, he goes, this whole triangle, that's strategy. And this tiny bit up the top on the peak, we drew a line, that's execution. Spend all your time on strategy and less on the execution, because the execution's easy once you get the strategy right. And that totally transformed our sort of way of thinking from just doing really black gags to much more solving problems and doing things that, people reacted to at an emotional level. And so that was like an incredible 2 years in London, learning from all the very best people you possibly could. Once a lack of vitamin D sort of really started to kick in, and I took that junior portfolio with my partner and we moved back to Australia and we started our ad career proper, heading around all the usual suspects in Australia. So that was the first part of the career anyway.
Yeah, chapter one.
Yeah. So what did we do? We had this great junior portfolio and we went into Clem Sydney was our first agency, and lots of blue chip clients, lots of Visas and Pepsis and Uncle Toby's, and so we fitted right in there with our It's a Bit Black Lads portfolio. And so we worked at Clem Sydney, worked at DDB, Saatchi's, George Pat's, Campaign Palace, rest in peace. I guess over that, spending 17 years as a creative and then eventually a creative director, you do become aware of your own strengths and weaknesses. And we were talking about this just before, and I'm acutely aware of my own strengths and weaknesses.
And they are? All right, lay it on us.
Well, I know what my strength is, which is, I tend to gravitate towards those ideas that are a bit on the edge and a bit divisive. They're normally, couched in humour, but they move the needle, you react to them, and that's where I have the most fun, and that's definitely where I was able to get the best results, was in creating really spiky, interesting, divisive advertising.
On the right side of wrong.
Just the right amount of wrong.
Just the right amount of wrong.
And so that, it held me in good stead for what was to come with Mona.
Correct.
But had the good fortune to win a bunch of awards in that space, and the one that I covet more than any other, which is, the most complained about campaign for 3 years running, which was Devondale. So that was the definitely learning about my strengths. It was in that comedy space, but also my grounding in marketing, which was, and in the English style of advertising, which was all best practice. It's fluent devices, it's mental availability, it's creating a platform that you can then execute in any channel. That was just the way you did advertising, and that held me in really good stead coming into the Australian market.
Yep.
And the weaknesses is something that I know now, and you don't know what you don't know, do you, Dan?
Yeah.
But what I know now is that there's something a bit toxic about the way that you operate in advertising, where you try and you don't like feedback. So, you're the creative guys and you try and protect your idea, and anyone that interacts with that is only going to make it worse. And that's sort of an attitude that you get into.
Yep.
It's, death by 1,000 cuts. And so that developed into a real weakness of mine, which is not seeking feedback and not seeking collaboration, and much more wanting to, hold on to my thing really tightly. And that's something that I've had to overcome as I, get into especially at Mona, which is a much more collaborative space, and as a manager, like working out that it's not, there's these toxic sort of types of management, which is very top down, and it's I, me, we.
Yeah.
And that's not the way that's how management, you can apportion tasks, but leadership, is about, getting your team to perform, and the best way to do that, and got into some bad habits in advertising, but then sort of was able to address those in sort of the latter
How do you
half.
go about building that muscle? I think because you're not Robinson Crusoe in that space, as you try to unshackle yourselves from, the fixation of performance, particularly in your early career, right? When you're an individual contributor and it's, you're firing up and this will be the time that I'm going to get no feedback and I've nailed it.
Yeah.
To a position of, hold on a second, I'm doing myself a disservice.
Yeah.
How do you go about building that muscle?
I was really lucky. Last year, I did the Marketing Academy, selected for the Marketing Academy Scholarship. And so they get 30 of the senior marketers from around Australia, and then you spend a year learning from the best in the business. And I'm just going to steal the wisdom that I learned from that last year and pass it off as my own right now.
Great.
And
on giant shoulders, we love that.
Yeah. And so what I identified through that was, you get these skills that get you up to a certain point in your career, and then your second career starts as a manager, and you've got no skills for it. So I'm sort of Mona standard at marketing and especially at the comms side of things.
Yep.
I'm not Mona standard at management and leadership. And so you've got this second half of your career where you have to actively start developing those skills. And one of the great sort of tips that we got from last year was this idea of just always trying to get people to make your work 10% better. So it's opening yourself up. Feedback's a gift. Opening yourself up to everything you do. So it's on every brief. It's on everything I do now. It's like giving it to make this 10% better for me. So you're actively asking for a collaboration in everything you do, and then that becomes the culture. As a leader, people mirror the behaviour of those around you. And so that's definitely something that I've had to learn and unlearn from advertising, and now bake into what I do as a leader at Mona.
And what do you look for in your leaders? I mean, I can imagine that the marketing team you have to build at Mona, and for those that might not have listened to the last time you were on, I think it's probably worthwhile explaining what the culture at Mona is. But I can imagine that that's a really tough team to recruit for, particularly for great leaders that are going to join, and build momentum in that way.
I mean, got to hire people smarter than yourself. So that's the easy bit, finding people smarter than me. Mona, you're looking for people that are going to thrive in chaos. So we actually write it on all our job ads. Mona's not for everyone. Some people will thrive in this autonomous, chaotic environment. And for other people, that's really stressful when you don't have those walls. And so we actively look for people that, thrive in that environment, that draw energy from the chaos. Because if you don't, there's too many curveballs and too much creativity and too much just-in-time decision-making for it to be for everyone. And so, hiring, always look for smart people, always looking for people that are going to bring, something to the team that we don't currently have. But for Mona in particular, we're always looking for people that can contribute to the creativity of the business. So that was my, when I got the job at Mona, I was doing the interview with David, and he's, going, what do you think of our marketing? And I said to him, I think your marketing does a good job of communicating the creativity of Mona, but it doesn't contribute to the creativity of Mona. And, that's marketing 101. Everything you do, your brand positioning, everything's got to contribute to that position. And for Mona, it's risk-taking, it's creativity, it's being divisive, being hedonistic. And if that's not reflected in your marketing, then you're not helping position the brand. So that was, he happened to agree. I don't think he was listening to me actually, but he nodded along and I got the job. So we're looking for people that can contribute to that, have that skill set, and so that's how we hire.
How do you cultivate creativity?
Definitely, you've got to be wired that way. You've got to want to be, bursting at the seams with ideas and wanting to be heard, and so we tend to attract those people anyway. At Mona, everyone's got like 8 degrees and are art majors and English majors, and have got side hustles as jewelers and photographers and metal workers. So it's that place. Everyone's got skills coming out of their ear holes. So we don't have to actively go, oh, but are you creative? Like, it's Mona. People want to come there and stretch their legs. I've just got to provide the space for them to do that. Otherwise, they're going to be dissatisfied.
A paddock to roam in.
Yeah. We don't pay enough for it to them to be dissatisfied by salary alone. You've got to, is the work I'm doing here the best work that I've ever done? Am I happy? And that for me, that's always come from, how interesting the work is. So yeah, that's we don't have to try too hard to attract creative people.
I want to talk to you about getting it wrong, because I think, and I mean, you've been up here talking about, taking risks as brands, and I think that there are risks and then there are risks, and I think, you sit on the right side of wrong more often than not. How do you go about, that cultivating and nurturing, a fixation on failing? Because, you and I were talking just before, you guys experiment wildly, right? And that there's a level of resilience and grit that's got to be required with that sort of, fail fast and fail big.
Yeah, I mean, definitely coming from advertising to client side, it's supposed to be that, it's a more conservative environment than it was in advertising. It's not that at Mona. Like, it's wild. Now I'm the grown up, and I've got loose cannon owners like David and his partner Kirsha that are, just wildly creative and doing things that occasionally need to be reined in. So it was the opposite of a normal client side sort of position. But the unique thing about Mona is our appetite for risk. And, David's described himself as a risk psychopath. So for those that don't know, David's a mathematician. He's the world's biggest gambler. He's a statistical genius. And he has this theory that he applies to his investing and to his gambling that we all also apply to Mona, and I apply to the marketing. And that is this theory of asymmetric upside, which is you take lots and lots of big risks with a really big upside and a small downside. So you win big, lose small. And if you only take those types of risks, if you only take big swings, you'll end up, when finally one of them comes off, you'll end up, earning more or meeting your objectives faster than any other strategy that you could implement. And so that comes from this, David's done the stats on it. Most of what we do is down to luck. So you've just got to keep having bullets in the barrel.
Staying power.
Yeah. And so a good example of that would be our appetite for our psychopathic, appetite for risk would be the ladies' lounge at Mona, which has been sort of in the news cycle.
Yep.
And so we've created this very lavish space at Mona that is, it's filled with Picassos and Sydney Nolans, and you get sparkling wine when you enter, and there's, aesthetically pleasing people in there to massage your shoulders and fold your laundry and stretch your feet. But it's for ladies only. You can only for people that identify as a lady. And so it's us being really mischievous there. And that's been in the museum for 4 years, and finally someone took the bait and took us to court for discrimination. So it was actually this lovely guy from Sydney, and he made the very good point that I've paid my entry fee into Mona, and I'm now not able to experience one of the artworks because of my gender. And our counterpoint was, oh no, you're experiencing
the artwork
exactly as intended. Your exclusion from the artwork is the artwork. And for us, that risk of being taken to court, and I think you went there and it was shut down. I think we've got a sign saying under reform. And so, now we're having this amazing conversation through the Supreme Court of the nature of positive discrimination and art's role within that. So that's our brand purpose, to have those interesting ideas. And so it's on brand for us. And it's absolutely a worthwhile investment just to interrogate that idea. And it's super important for us as a museum to be able to have the space to explore those ideas and not be regulated. But then on the plus side, me as a marketer, we've earned about 55 million in media from it. So it's been on the BBC, New York Times.
Asymmetric upside.
So that's a risk worth taking, and a bunch of risks don't come off. And that's the freedom to fail is absolutely at the heart of that. You've got to be prepared to have some failures. The secret is to just make sure to recognize those failures and put a bullet in them sort of sooner rather than
quick
later.
enough.
So
you and I have had a couple of chats in the past around the sort of this shift from agency side to client side, and I think there's a lot of professionals that might be staring down, that same trajectory. Go, do I go, client side? I've spent, my formative years in agency. I'd love to know your reflections on that, and what might be some of the lessons learned, and maybe some of the guidance for those that want to make that same transition.
Yeah, like it's the big lesson that I took, and there's absolutely all these positives from the agency side, and I've hired lots of agency side people at Mona, and there's, I guess, the growing trend towards in-housing agencies, rather than relying on an external agency, is you are just so much closer to the information and to the problem. You have a better understanding of the brand, you have a better understanding of the business objectives, and there's no, like, everyone's aligned on the task. You're not trying to win awards, you're not trying to further your career, you're trying to make Mona sing, or your whatever business you're in sing. And so that's the big lesson for me as a marketer coming onto the client side, is just the value of those other three P's. So when you're in advertising, it's all on, the promotional P, it's all on the comms, it's the be all and end all. And we get frustrated by clients that don't seem as passionate or as interested in it as we are. And then you come client side and you're like, oh, like that's right down the end of the funnel. The most important thing is to get the product right, which is why the ladies' lounge is so interesting. That didn't take any comms from me. That was a really interesting product in a really interesting place that we brought to market with a really interesting pricing structure. And that's what made it distinctive, and that's what reinforced our brand positioning. The comms didn't have anything to do with it. And so the client side, it's much more about focusing on those other three Ps and the value that you can get from those. And the comms is just the sugar on top. So that's my lived experience of moving from agency side to client side. But I'm just in the very fortunate position that I can do that in a place that's still all about creativity. And I understand that not all client side environments are like that. Mona is. It's almost a more creative environment and a more chaotic environment than an advertising one. So I'm very fortunate in that respect.
How do you go about hiring great leaders in your team? Knowing that you have to lead such a unique microcosm in marketing. And I think, from what you've been speaking about, it really is the exception to the rule. I can imagine that there's a unique litigation criteria beyond, creativity for anyone that comes and joins. What do you look for in the people that are watching your six when you're not there?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I've more promoted rather than had to go external on leadership. And so, and again, that's, what I've learned about leadership is to provide the platform for other people to show their skills and then to support that. And so that's been part of the way that I've built a team, is to promote from inside to those leadership positions. And what a great double whammy that you've got really, really talented people, but they know the brands inside out. They know what they're doing, and Mona is so nuanced that it's very hard to bring someone in that is going to hit the ground running. And so just in answer to that specific question, my leaders have come from within my team,
building bench strength.
It's bringing them up.
I'm curious, have you had someone that's come in and you've got, you've taken a punt on someone and you've just realized really quickly, this is not going to be the place for you?
And vice versa.
Where you're like, oh, and then they've surprised you?
Well, no, them realizing that Mona's not the place for them. So that'll happen in any business. We've got really long tenure at Mona, because I think you get indoctrinated into the cult, and then it's hard to go back to civilian life. But absolutely, Mona is not for everyone. There'll be people that don't thrive in that environment, which is lots of late breaking curveballs. David's got this philosophy of just-in-time decision making, so he waits for all the data to come in, and then right at the end, that's when the decision comes. That's not ideal from a workflow perspective, and that can really frustrate some people. This great bit of advice that I got last year about leadership. It was so I'm going to steal it again, Dan. It's from Chris Savage. And he's like, you can't control, what gets thrown at you in life, but you can control how you react to it. And so his mantra was, conditions are always perfect.
I like that.
And so you control the way that you react to it. And I guess that's what we look for at Mona, is people that are able to, when curveballs get thrown at them, they're not looking at the downside of that curveball, they're looking at the upside of that curveball.
It's a great philosophy. Conditions are always perfect.
He had this, and we're doing the breadcrumb thing here, so these are meager breadcrumbs, by the way. But Chris gave this great example, which was, you're waiting for a taxi to turn up, and it's 30 minutes late, and you get in, and you can choose to be like fuming in there and go, I'm late for a meeting, and you're in that space, and get on your phone and start doom scrolling or whatever you do, or you can choose to, you're trapped in a cab for the next half an hour, choose to have a really interesting conversation with the cab driver. And he goes, I guarantee you, if you spend a lifetime doing that, of trying to connect with people and talking with people rather than sitting there on your phone and getting frustrated, like the positive impact that will have will be, extraordinary. And so I was like, all right. So I was pretty literal. I was then
started chatting to cabbies.
I chatted to, right after that talk, I got stuck at quarantine station in Sydney trying to get to trying to get to North Sydney. And Uber was 30 minutes late, got in there. I was 30 minutes late for meeting my mate. And so I get chatting to the Uber driver. There's this Thai guy called John. And I go, how's it going, John? And he'd just been through the pandemic. And he was a luxury tour operator, and his business had cratered, and he was just getting back on his feet. And so he had this fleet of Ubers, and this was one of them. And he goes, I'm actually getting my first group of Thai millionaires to come in in 2 weeks' time. And I was like, oh, it's great, John, you're back. Yeah. And he's going, yeah, we're going down to Tassie. And I'm like, John, I'm from Tassie. Are you taking the millionaires to Mona? Mona, millionaires love Mona. And he's going, what's the Mona? So we get to chatting, and the next thing you know, we're exchanging sort of details, and I've given him the details of our, VIP experiences team. And the next thing you know, we've got, helicopters of Thai millionaires flying to a sex and death museum in Hobart.
There you go. So the universe delivers serendipitously.
Conditions are always perfect.
Are always perfect. All right. Robbie, last question from me. It's the same one that we end on with all of our guests. And you've scattered breadcrumbs along the way, so I'll let you beg, borrow, and steal from others as you need. If you could go back and speak to Robbie 20 years ago, knowing what you know now with all of the success that you've had to set you up for even greater success, what would you tell yourself?
I reckon I took the long way to getting where I am, and I think my advice for the younger me would be to not be afraid to seek out more advice, more feedback, develop your cheer squad of people that support you that you can lean on. Try and find more mentors early. I think it's the best thing you can possibly do is hook onto some mentorship early on in your career. Some people that you really, really trust and respect their opinion, and then lean on them. And again, it was something we learnt last year in TMA, which was, develop your cheer squad. Who are your people that are going to fight for you when you're not in the room? Who are the people that are, going to connect you to people that you need connections with at the next step? And so I think I was pretty focused early on just the ads, on just the skills, as opposed to developing the relationships that you need in a career. So the most important thing is make those connections with as many people as possible, nurture those relationships, find a mentor that, you really connect with, because people want to help. People want to see you succeed, and that's absolutely the most valuable thing that you can have in a career. So younger Robbie, stop, get off the pad, and then start actually connecting.
Great advice
with as many
to get great advice.
Yeah.
Robbie, thank you so much, mate. A delight as always. It's been a real pleasure
to be here. Thanks so much.
Cheers, buddy.